The mountain man named Eli Harding had lived alone for so many years that even the tall pines seemed to know his silence. His cabin sat deep in the hills of Montana Territory, far from the road, far from the towns, and even farther from the noise of people. He liked it that way. He hunted, chopped wood, traded pelts, and kept his thoughts locked inside. Some men learn to speak less with age. Eli had learned to speak almost nothing at all. But winter that year came early, sharp, and heavy. The storms rolled in before he had finished storing food. His traps brought in less fur than he expected, and the cold wind cut through the walls no matter how much wood he stacked inside. He kept working, kept hammering, kept fixing things around his place, but even he knew he would need help. Not help with the woods or the hunting. Help with something he understood even less than people, keeping his home warm with real meals, warm blankets, and small touches of comfort he never learned to make. That was when he heard about her. The folks at the trading post whispered about a woman staying in the old shack by the frozen creek. A young widow, pregnant, trying to survive on almost nothing. She had walked across half the territory with her few belongings after her husband passed months earlier. They said she refused charity. They said she wanted to work. They also said she was proud, gentle, and carrying a child she protected more fiercely than anything else. Her name was Mara. Eli listened to the talk without showing it mattered to him. He only pulled his hat lower and loaded the supplies he came for. But her name followed him out the door. Mara, a woman alone, expecting a child, trying to survive a mountain winter. Something about it bothered him more than it should. He tried ignoring the thought as he rode back through the heavy snow, but her situation repeated in his mind like his own steps, crunching over the frozen path. By the next morning, he couldn't shake it anymore. The cold had grown stronger overnight. His cabin, though solid, felt colder than before. He cooked himself a simple breakfast, but the pan clanged loudly in the quiet room, and for the first time, it felt too empty. He looked around at the plain wooden walls, the rough table, the fire that burned without warmth beyond its light. He realized something he did not want to admit. He needed someone to help him get through the winter. And maybe he did not want that someone to be just anyone, so he saddled his horse and left. The sky was a pale gray as Eli rode toward the old shack. He did not know what he planned to say. Words were never his strength. But sometimes life did not wait for perfect words. The ride took nearly an hour, and by the time he reached the place, the wind had picked up. Snow whipped across the ground, and the shack looked worn, leaning to one side, as if a strong gust might topple it. He climbed off his horse and approached slowly. Before he could knock, the door opened. She stood there with a shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Her dark hair was tied back, her face pale from the cold. She looked both surprised and cautious when she saw a large mountain man on her doorstep. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she gathered herself and gave a polite nod. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked softly. Her voice was gentle but tired. He noticed the small swell of her stomach beneath the shawl. She was indeed expecting. "My name's Eli Harding," he said, clearing his throat. "I have a cabin in the hills. I'm looking to hire someone. For winter." She waited, unsure where the sentence was going. Eli shifted his weight, trying to find words that made sense. "I heard you were looking for work," he said simply. She held onto the doorframe, steady but cautious. "I can cook and sew," she said. "I clean too. But I don't take charity." "It's not charity," he replied. "Work. Real work. I'll pay." The wind pushed harder, sending flakes of snow inside. She stepped back slightly to shield the cold from entering. "Why me?" she asked. Eli looked at her, uncertain how much truth he should share. But he had never liked lies, so he said it plainly. "You need a warm place before winter gets worse," he said. "And I need someone who can make a cabin feel less empty." Her eyes softened a little, not with pity, but understanding. She looked back at the small room behind her. A thin mattress, a small pot, a cold stove. Everything showed struggle. Then she looked forward at him, a man who seemed strong enough to survive a dozen winters, but still stood there asking for help in a quiet, humble way. "I can work," she said again, "but I must be treated with respect, and I make my own choices." Eli nodded immediately. "That's fair. And I need a safe place for my child," she added. "You'll have that," he said. For the first time, she gave a small smile. It was faint, but warm enough to melt a little of the cold between them. She packed only what she needed. Eli helped her onto his horse, careful, slow, respectful. Her quiet thank you was barely a whisper lost in the wind, but he heard it. The ride back was silent, except for the horse's steady steps through the thickening snow. He kept glancing at her to make sure she wasn't too cold. She kept one hand on her stomach and the other holding onto the saddle, trusting him more with each passing minute. When they reached his cabin, he opened the door for her. She stepped inside, surprised by the size and strength of the place. Though simple, it was sturdy and warmer than her shack had ever been. She turned slowly, taking in the details: the well-built fireplace, the shelves lined with tools and jars, the clean floor, and the quiet order of a man who lived alone for too long. "It's nice," she said softly. "Not finished," Eli replied. "Never really knew how to make it a home." She placed her bundle of belongings on the table and looked at him with a steady gaze. "I can do that," she said, and she did. Within an hour, she had a small pot warming over the fire. The smell of simple soup filled the cabin, easing the sharp edge of winter outside. Eli sat quietly on the far side of the room, unsure whether he should help or stay away. But she worked calmly, steadily, humming a soft tune under her breath. The air changed, warmer, softer, lighter, something he did not know he had been missing, when she finally sat down to rest. He noticed she looked pale. The ride had tired her. Her hand rested over her stomach protectively. But there was no fear, only careful attention. "You should rest," he said. "I will," she replied. "But thank you for giving me a chance." Eli shook his head. "You're doing me the favor." She watched him for a long moment, as if trying to read a man who rarely spoke. Then she smiled again, a little wider than before. "You're a good man, Eli Harding." She said no, he answered quietly. "Just a man trying to get through winter." "Maybe," she replied, "but you still offered help to someone in need." That means something. He didn't know how to respond. So he stood, gathered extra firewood, and set it by the hearth. She watched him with a softer expression than he had ever seen directed at him. It made his chest feel strangely full as the evening settled. The fire glowed warm and bright. The soup simmered gently. She rested in the only chair while he sat on the floor beside the fire, sharpening a tool without much focus. He kept glancing at her, not wanting to intrude, but feeling responsible for her comfort. She noticed, but instead of speaking, she simply smiled and let him be. For the first time in years, the cabin didn't feel empty, and Eli Harding, who had believed winter would be a season of struggle, realized something unexpected. Maybe he had not hired a cook at all. Maybe he had invited hope into his home. He didn't say it out loud. He didn't even fully understand it yet. But something inside him shifted that night. As the snow fell outside and the warmth of her presence settled quietly into the wooden walls, he had offered her safety, a chance, a place to stay. But she had brought something far more powerful. She had brought grace. And without knowing it, she had already begun to change him. The next morning came with a soft light slipping through the small cabin window. A pale sun rose slowly over the snowy hills, touching the wooden room with gentle warmth. Eli Harding woke early, as he always did, but this time the cabin felt different. He could hear a quiet sound coming from the kitchen corner. It was the soft clatter of pans, the steady rhythm of someone moving with purpose. For years, Eli had woken to silence. No footsteps, no humming, no warm smells drifting through the air. But now, as he sat up and pulled on his boots, he realized something simple yet powerful. He was not alone anymore. When he stepped into the main room, he found Mara standing near the fire. She was stirring a pot with slow, steady motions. Her hair was tied back, her shawl wrapped loosely around her shoulders, and the faint glow of the flames lit her gentle face. When she turned and saw him, she offered a small smile. "Good morning," she said. Eli nodded, unsure how to respond politely without sounding awkward. "Morning." The soup she made the previous night had been simple, but good. Now she was preparing something that smelled even better, oats cooked slowly with a pinch of salt. Something he never made for himself. "You didn't have to cook so early," he said. "I like starting the day with something warm," she answered, "and it helps me feel settled." He watched her for a moment, fascinated by how icily she moved in a place she had only just arrived in. Most strangers hesitated, unsure of what to touch or how to fit in someone else's home. But Mara moved as if she belonged, not in an arrogant way, but in a calm, gentle manner that seemed to fill the room with peace. "Sit," she said kindly. "It's almost ready." Eli obeyed without argument. He sat at the table, an old piece of wood he had built years ago, uneven but strong. Mara placed a small bowl before him. The oats were warm and thick, steam rising in soft curls. He tasted a spoonful. It was good, better than anything he had made for himself. "This is nice," he said quietly. She smiled, pleased. Food always tastes better when made for someone. He looked up at her then, noticing again the small swell of her stomach. She rested one hand on it as she stood by the fire, almost without thinking. "Are you feeling all right this morning?" he asked, concerned. "Better than most days," she replied softly. "Sleeping in a warm place helps more than you know." Eli felt something tighten in his chest. He imagined her in that cold shack sleeping under thin blankets, the wind pushing through the cracks. He couldn't understand how she had survived there at all. Mara saw him thinking and gently changed the subject. "I can help with the chores after breakfast," she said. "You can rest," he replied quickly. "No need to push yourself." She shook her head, determined but calm. "I want to work. It keeps my mind steady, and I have done chores all my life. I know what I can manage." Her voice held quiet strength. Not stubbornness, not pride, just a steady certainty. Eli nodded, respecting it. After breakfast, Mara cleaned the table. Eli stepped outside to chop wood, a task he did daily. The sound of his axe striking logs echoed through the cold air. Each swing was strong, solid, sure. He had been a mountain man for most of his life. Chopping wood was like breathing, but today, something was different. Through the open cabin door, he saw Mara sweeping the floor. She moved slowly, careful with her steps, but she worked with focus. She dusted shelves, folded blankets, and arranged things neatly. She even placed a small cloth over the table, something he had never thought to do. By midday, the cabin felt almost new. Eli returned inside with a load of firewood. The warmth of the room greeted him first. Then the smell of something cooking again, simple vegetables, simmering with herbs. Mara turned toward him, brushing hair from her face. "Lunch will be ready soon," she said. He nodded, unsure why his throat felt tight. The last time someone had cooked for him, he could not even remember. "Did you rest at all?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "I sat by the fire for a while," then her expression softened. "But I'm used to working. It makes me feel useful. You don't have to prove anything here," Eli replied. "I know," she said gently. "But I want to help. You gave me safety. I want to give something back." Eli was quiet for a long moment. He had never expected such kindness from a stranger as they ate lunch. Mara asked questions, not personal ones, but simple ones about the land, the animals, the mountain trails. Eli answered in his slow, plain way. She listened with interest, leaning slightly forward, her hands resting on her stomach. "Do you live alone by choice?" she asked cautiously. He nodded. "Always been better with the woods than with people." "People can be hard," she agreed softly, "but they can be good too." Eli looked at her, wondering what kind of life she had lived before the hardships. She had the voice of someone who understood pain and kindness in equal measure. After lunch, she insisted on washing the dishes, even though he offered to help. She laughed quietly when he nearly dropped a plate. "You're strong," she said, smiling. but you're not gentle with dishes." He felt heat rise in his face. Not embarrassment exactly, just unfamiliar attention. He muttered something about not breaking them on purpose. And she laughed again, a soft sound that made the cabin warmer. By evening, they settled into a quiet routine. Mara rested in the chair near the fire, her hands folded over her stomach. Eli sharpened tools or mended gear. She asked him small questions from time to time, and he answered. He didn't talk much, but with her, he found himself speaking a little more. Snow fell outside, in thick, heavy flakes. The world looked white and silent, but inside the cabin, the light from the fire danced across the walls. "Eli," Mara said quietly. He looked up from the tool he was fixing. "Thank you for bringing me here," she said. "My child and I, we would have struggled to survive that shack much longer." He swallowed, unsure how to answer. Anyone would have helped. She shook her head slowly. "Not everyone. Many people turned away because I am alone. And because they feared the burden of a woman carrying a child." Eli clenched his jaw. His hands tightened around the tool. "They're fools." Her eyes softened at his sudden firmness. "You don't know me," she said gently. "Don't need to," he replied. "You needed warmth. That's enough." She looked at him with a deep, quiet understanding. Her eyes shone a little in the firelight, not with tears, but with gratitude. "You're a good man," she whispered. He shook his head again. Eli never believed such things about himself. But she continued speaking. "You may not think so," she said, "but you gave someone hope today." Well, I had no words for that. So he stood and added more wood to the fire, needing to move, to hide the strange warmth rising in his chest. She watched him, not judging, not expecting anything more from him. As the night deepened, the wind howled outside. Mara shivered slightly, pulling her shawl tighter. Eli noticed immediately. Without thinking, he took one of the thicker blankets from his bed and handed it to her. "You need this more than I do," he said. She touched the blanket with gentle fingers. "Thank you." "It's nothing," he replied. "It is something," she said softly. She placed the blanket over her lap, letting the warmth settle around her. Eli watched her carefully, making sure she was comfortable. She noticed, and her smile grew warmer. "You're very protective," she said quietly. He looked away, uncomfortable. "Just doing what's right." "That," she said gently, "is a rare thing." For the first time in years, Eli felt seen truly, seen without judgment, without fear, without distance. Mara's presence eased the quiet ache he never admitted he had. She didn't fill the cabin with noise or demands. She simply existed with a steady kindness that softened every rough edge of the place. When she finally fell asleep in the chair, Eli covered her shoulders with the blanket more securely. He watched her for a moment, the firelight flickering on her peaceful face. She looked safe. She looked warm. She looked at home. Something unspoken settled in his chest, then something like responsibility, something like respect, something like the beginning of a bond he did not yet understand. He sat on the floor beside the fire, keeping watch through the long winter night. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. And without realizing it, he had begun to change in ways only her presence could shape. The days passed slowly but warmly in Eli Harding's cabin, each one shaped by the steady rhythm of winter. The storm outside grew stronger, piling snow against the cabin walls and coating the trees with heavy white branches. But inside, something gentle unfolded, something Eli had never expected to experience in his quiet, solitary life. Mara settled into the cabin's routine as if she had been there for years. She cooked simple meals, kept the place tidy, and rested when she needed to. Eli made sure the fire never died out, cutting extra wood every morning so she wouldn't feel the cold when the nights grew harsh. Their lives began to move together, quietly, steadily, like two people who had unknowingly waited for this calm for a long time. One afternoon, the sky turned the color of storm clouds, heavy and threatening. Eli was outside stacking wood when he heard the cabin door open behind him. Mara stepped out, wrapped in a thick blanket, holding a small cup of warm tea. "You shouldn't be out here long," she said. "The wind is turning," he nodded, wiping snow from his beard. just finishing up. You stay warm. She offered the tea. This is for you. He looked at her, surprised. You made this? Yes, she said, smiling gently. You work outside all day? You should have something warm too. Eli hesitated, then took the cup. The heat seeped into his hands. He hadn't been offered warm tea by anyone in years. Mara watched him, her eyes soft. You do so much for me, she said. Let me do something small for you. He didn't know how to respond. Compliments always made him uneasy, especially from someone who spoke them so kindly. He sipped the tea, and the warmth spread through him. It's good, he said quietly. She laughed softly. You always say that, because it's true. She looked at him for a long moment, her eyes studying him not in a judging way, but as if she was trying to understand the heart behind the rough exterior. Eli wasn't used to being seen like that. He wasn't used to anyone paying attention to him at all. You're not as hard as you pretend to be, she said gently. He lowered his eyes. I'm just a man trying to live a simple life. You care? She said. You care more than most. Eli didn't reply. The storm wind brushed against them, pulling Mara's blanket slightly. He stepped closer, shielding her from the wind instinctively. You should go inside, he said. She nodded. But before turning, she said something that stayed with him long after she shut the door. This cabin feels safe because of you. Eli stood in the snow for a while, letting those words settle into his chest. That evening, the storm arrived in full force. Wind roared outside, shaking the cabin walls. Snow blew against the windows. Mara sat near the fire, her hands placed gently over her stomach. Eli sat close, sharpening his knife out of habit, though the blade already shone with a clean edge. Will the storm last long? She asked softly. Maybe, Eli said. These mountain storms can stay for days, but we have wood. We have food. We'll be fine. Mara nodded, but a small worry flickered in her eyes. She shifted uncomfortably, and Eli noticed immediately. Are you all right? He asked. It's just the baby moving more, she said softly. Sometimes it's strong. Sometimes it makes me sit still. He watched her carefully. He didn't understand much about childbirth or pregnancy, but he could see the discomfort in her expression. He placed more wood on the fire to warm the room even further. Do you need anything? He asked. Just company, she said gently. It helps, Eli nodded. He didn't speak much, but he stayed close, his presence steady and quiet. Mara closed her eyes for a moment, breathing slowly. You know, she said after a long pause, I didn't expect to find peace this winter. I thought I would just try to survive long enough for my child to be born. But this place gives me something better. What's that? He asked hope. Eli felt his breath catch in his throat. Hope wasn't something he heard often, not from himself, not from others. But she said it with such sincerity that he felt the weight of it. You're stronger than you think, he said quietly. She smiled faintly. And you're kinder than you think. Their eyes met across the firelight, and for a moment something passed between them, something gentle and steady, like two people recognizing a truth that had been quietly growing inside the walls of the cabin. Later that night, when Mara had fallen asleep in the chair, Eli watched her again. He noticed how peaceful she looked, how safe she seemed. He carefully placed another blanket over her shoulders and made sure the fire stayed bright until dawn. The next morning, the storm hadn't ended. Snow was piled high against the door. Eli pushed it open with effort and stepped outside to clear a path. Mara watched from the doorway, wrapped in blankets. Be careful, she said. I always am. When he came back inside, shaking snow from his shoulders, she handed him a dry cloth. You work too hard, she said softly. You rest too little, he replied. She smiled. A small, playful curve of her lips. We balance each other, then. Eli froze for a moment, surprised by her gentle joke. He'd never heard someone speak to him like that. He wasn't sure how to respond. But Mara's eyes held warmth, a simple affection that didn't ask for anything. As the day passed, they worked side by side. Eli fixed a loose board on the wall. Mara mended a torn sleeve in one of his shirts. She cooked a warm stew that filled the cabin with a comforting smell. Even the storm outside felt less threatening because they were together inside. At midday, she grew tired again. She sank into the chair with a soft sigh, pressing a hand gently to her stomach. "Are you hurting?" Eli asked, worried. "No," she said, breathing slowly. "Just the baby reminding me that it's almost ready to meet the world." Eli stiffened. He had not prepared himself for the idea of helping during childbirth. He wasn't afraid of snowstorms, wild animals, or long winters, but the idea of a woman giving birth under his roof sent a strange fear through him. "Should we go to the town?" he asked. She shook her head. "The roads are buried in snow. And I'll be fine. I've done this before." He blinked. "Before?" Her expression softened with memory. "I lost my first child during the sickness 2 winters ago. But I learned a lot. I know what signs to watch for. I know what I need. I just need calm and warmth and someone nearby." Eli swallowed. "I can do that." "I know," she said softly. That night, the wind finally began to quiet. The storm had exhausted itself, leaving a deep stillness over the mountains. Mara sat by the fire again, sewing slowly. Eli carved a piece of wood, shaping it without thinking. "Eli," she said quietly. He looked up. "I want to ask something of you." "Anything," he said without hesitation. "When the baby comes, will you stay near me? Not far? Just close enough that I know I'm not alone." Eli set the wood down. He didn't speak for a moment, making sure he understood her words completely. "You won't be alone," he said finally. "Not while you're under my roof." She nodded, relief softening her face. "You're a good man," she whispered. He shook his head, but she didn't argue this time. She simply looked at him with quiet trust, the kind that could only grow in the warmth of shared days and long nights during a harsh winter. As the fire crackled softly, she placed her hand on her stomach and looked at him. "You've given me more than work," she said. "You've given me a place to breathe again." Eli felt something shift inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. Something deep and steady. "You've given this cabin life," he said quietly. For a long moment, they simply sat together, the firelight warming their faces, their breaths steady in the quiet room. Outside, the mountains slept under a thick blanket of snow. But inside that humble cabin, something new had begun, something like comfort, something like connection, something like the first spark of belonging. Winter had brought them together out of necessity, but what was growing between them was something far greater, something neither of them had expected, something that felt like grace,